Welcome back to Cade Sport, the virtual cycling platform that invites you, dear viewer, to stop pedaling and start cycling. You're joining me, Mark, as I navigate you through another series of rip-roaring races live. And speaking of, where are we racing today? Well, we are going to be beginning on our all-road, all-power course, going to the Sun Smash. While it is our all-road course, this is one of our more technical road courses with lots of tight hairpin corners in descent. So this is going to be one where riders are going to want to pay attention to their speed and to their braking therein. So it's 5 kilometers per lap, 3 laps for a total of 15K. Race 2 will see us take on Dark Matter Tech, one of our sci-fi courses, another road course, and it's going to be a 4.8 kilometer total of just shy of 1 kilometer for 5 laps. And race 3, this is going to be our big 3 times multiplier, and this is actually one of our mountain bike courses, so we're changing up where the big multiplier is going to be, and it's Country Rally, 1.2 Ks per lap, 4 laps total for 4.8 kilometer total. And which power-ups do we have today? Well, our contenders in race 1 will actually have a power-up for the all-road course. So they get 3 of the great responsibility, which shoots you up to an unbelievable amount of power, one that would even make riders in the Tours blush. So it's going to be 5 seconds of power with a 3-minute recharge time. There are 3 of those total. Race 2 sees 2 power-ups. So they're unlimited because they are rechargeable. We have the Corner Caper, which prevents crashing in corners, meaning that riders can really put some power down going through those corners. And then we have Razor's Edge, which makes our racers nice and thin, so that they have an unbelievable and uncharacteristic aerodynamic ability, which will help them to be able to put down an unprecedented speed. Each one lasts for 10 seconds with a 90-second recharge time. So it's this recharge time that riders are going to want to watch out for today. And interestingly, again, making some changes, we do not have a power-up on the mountain bike course for the final map. So let's jump on over to the Go Into the Sun Smash and see how our riders are getting on as they are getting ready, doing a nice steady warm-up. And we're off. Erhan taking a nice bit of power off the front there. We've also got Ben Chillian and we've got Frank Garcia forming the spearhead, if you will, of the pack that is slowly beginning to form. So let's see what can happen here as we get into the race. And I'm not entirely sure if that was a bot or a rider new to the game, but it looks like we had somebody from Colombia. Oh, a nasty crash there with that steering collision with Peter Castro, who is an ace at that rollers that he's on. Look at that, makes it look easy. Live from the Netherlands and just making it look like a breeze on rollers. Something that I'm sure most of us roadies are incredibly jealous of. And there looking like he's going into a freewheel or a coasting, going into a corner, which is a nice skill to use, going into that corner and holding very stable on the front. Nice work, sir. Then we've got Zeb putting down an equal amount of power here. Really pushing through those quads, I'm sure. And Pedro closing up that gap. Pedro's always one of our powerhouses here in game. And he is on the tri-bike for that additional aero benefit today, and keeping very cautious through those corners, having learnt from previous races. Again, it's one of those things, I keep saying it every time, you got to remember not to get that tunnel vision. It's a lot easier said than done. I even do not practice what I preach myself. It's surprising, I know, that no one human is perfect. So look at this, even on the lead group, we've got a kind of elastic band effect going. So let's see if this can kind of go back to snap back to its relaxed state, if you will, as we begin to get power coming in, as we begin to get fatigue coming into the riders. Ben Chillian there live in the UK, putting down some good power on the chase. An interesting tactic there, getting out of the saddle and onto the hoods to get power down for the zenith of that climb, to kind of maintain the power going over. So is this Frank we see here using his great responsibility, having timed it very well for the one of our few dead straights in the map here, and then expertly dampening the brakes, knowing that that corner is coming up. So we are seeing, a couple of crashes there, Pedro and Carl. Unusual for Carl to crash ever. And we've got Frank here in the chase, knowing when to go into that free wheel, when to put pressure back onto the cranks, rounding that corner. So Zeb and Erhan and Pedro forming the tip of the spear, if you will, of our race pack today. Zeb always makes this look easy, whether it's his avatar or in the real world. Seeing some great rhythm there, some great cadence from our racers today. Very solid power numbers. The interesting thing with Zeb is he knows when to spike that speed and when to just hold it stable. He doesn't seem to panic too much about the speed, and that's really interesting to see. So it looks like everyone here is going for stable cadence, but with a high power. So high resistance, lower cadence to be able to hold a stable effort over threshold. Erhan here using the great responsibility. And leading off the speed in time, hopefully. There we go, fantastic stuff. We're beginning to see Zeb become more than an ant on the horizon, so we're beginning to close that gap. Han and Carl here as they jostle across the road trying to deny each other draft benefit. And Pedro closing that very same gap, slacking that elastic band, if you will. So we are just cresting the end of lap 1, going into lap 2. So that means we've got 5 kilometers down, just under 10 now to go. So we've got a really expert use of power and speed coming in on the front. Everybody getting really comfortable with knowing when to ease off the cranks and when to start riding once again. People are getting used to treating it pretty much as you would in the outside world. It's a really great effort there from Peter. He really does make that look incredibly easy on those rollers. We have a keyboard as well as his option of controls. There are 2 options for controls here in the game. One of them is the Co-app, and the other is to have keyboard prompts, similar to what Peter is using there. For the Co-app, once you download the game, you scan the QR code that appears on the root menu. That will open up a mobile-only version of the game on your phone, the benefit of which is that because it's not an app, it cannot track the key functions of your phone. The other is that it's going to be much more data light than an app. It works on a gyroscope, so you would attach it essentially to a handlebar mount on your bike, and that allows you to steer in-game, giving you very accurate steering controls. You also have that brake button, which the longer you hold that, the more of a percentile you brake by, ergo dampening your brakes out in the real world. You also then have the buttons to trigger your power-ups, but also outside the game, you can browse unconnected, where you can schedule yourself, now that I'm in North America, I should get used to that pronunciation. You can schedule yourself into races, rides, etc. And you can also do social functions such as adding friends or accepting friend requests. So we've got John Sears here, friend of Homer and Kay, who is putting in some good power here for a chase effort to close up the gaps. The interesting thing about this being a road course today is the gap seems to be, as I've said here a few times, like a stretched elastic band, which is interesting. Normally we see pelotons, maybe 1, maybe 2, so maybe like an attack peloton, chase peloton, but we are seeing riders being strung out today. Admittedly, this is a harder course. There is not much climbing here, but when it does come up, it is very sharp. Very sudden, very sharp, and then you have those corners that spring up on you. This one coming up, we're just beginning a descent going into, I believe, the second corner of this chicane. So it's things like that that can catch you out, especially on a direct drive smart trainer where you have the simulation of a freewheel and you also have the simulation of real world resistance. So we've got Zeb here tackling said corners like a boss. Oh, nice save there on that drift out. Managing to save here for the straight. Carl here in chase. And staying very stable through these corners. Oh, another great save with braking there with that drift out. And Pedro seeking to close said gap with Carl. And we've got Peter, Carl and Erhan here live on screen. And we've seen some really great efforts to close that gap to slacken off said elastic band. Homer here, look at that power. Absolute powerhouse. as we've mentioned numerous times here in game. So everyone's either just a little touch below threshold or over, knowing that this is an all-road course, so everyone's looking to maintain somewhere close to, ideally just a little bit over threshold. And we're seeing some great efforts. It takes a lot to maintain that for a distance, any distance. So that is, we're seeing some great riding from people today. Kay here closing that gap with Frank. Kay is also an expert rider, wife of Homer. So they're both riding live from their home state of Indiana, which has a huge cycling legacy all of its own, with Major Taylor, and being the birthplace of my favorite fiction movie of cycling, which is Breaking Away. My apologies. Indiana was not the birthplace of Major Taylor, but it was where he competed and where he was trained. I believe he was actually born in one of the southern states. Interestingly, as a comic book writer myself, there is a graphic novel coming out, I believe, next year about Major Taylor from Drawn and Quarterly out of Montreal, or Montreal in Canada. And so that looks like a fantastic graphic novel that's going to be coming out. Ben expertly closing that gap with Carl. Ben saying, "You will not deny me that draft benefit." So there's a 28-second lead that's been opened up by Zeb. Can Carl and Ben close that? I believe there might just be about enough time to get close to achieving that with what's left. Carl is saying he's going to give it his best as he's using the great responsibility, which has shot him up to almost 60 k's an hour. And an expert use of it, knowing that this is the longest straight on this map. So these fantastic graphics and shading elements and other such environmental elements that you're seeing live are produced by the Unity engine, but of course developed by the developers at Cyclogent, the company behind CadeSport. And you can go anywhere from just shy of 1080p right the way up to 4K rendering at 60 frames per second. And if memory serves, I do believe that this map is simulated on a real-world bike path in Montana. So Erhan here closing the gap with Pedro. Beginning to see that elastic band come into that slackened state that I mentioned as riders are reconnecting here. We're seeing Erhan there live from Turkey, putting in some solid power. So we're on one of our few continuous downhills here, which presents some unique challenges of its own, being that we're going through corners in this downhill. And this, if memory serves from training on this course recently, is where we're going back into an uphill gradient. Zeb there really comfortable on that lead. So comfortable that he's just able to entirely freewheel those corners without having to worry about pressing on the cranks to really get that distance opened up. But it does look like Carl has almost achieved what seemed impossible, which is to eat up an almost second lead. And Ben is not very far behind at all. So Zeb here on the lead. These are slightly uphill corners, which makes it easier to press through the cranks going through these corners, which is why you're seeing these great power numbers from Zeb coming through those corners. It doesn't look like much of an uphill, but you only need a little bit for that resistance to, I guess, counteract the physics that you'd otherwise be up against going through those corners. Momentum, that's the force I was looking for. And we've got this fantastic first-person view here with our camera operation, our vision mixing being provided to us live by the wonderful Damon out of the UK. And there we can see Damon. Again, that array is incredibly impressive, a little bit intimidating. My history myself being in film and TV production for my degree. And even I look at that and go, okay, rather you, Damon, than me. So Zeb here getting a little bit closer to threshold. Threshold for everybody in Pro Power mode is 421 watts. It is based on their real world thresholds, but it's equalized out to 421 watts. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means as we get to the end of the race here. But essentially, the game will crunch your numbers once you ride in Pro Power mode, and the algorithm that it's based upon will take what your functional threshold power is, what you can hold for an extended period of time, namely between 20 minutes and 1 hour. Ideally 20 minutes, because that's like your proper ramp test. And it will formulate your FTP, your functional threshold power, into 421 watts, meaning that you can ride together with people of various skill abilities. And Zeb easily claims this race. Carl not very far behind at all, managing to have eaten up a sizable amount of that gap. But unfortunately, when it gets to about 30 seconds with under 5Ks left, it becomes a little bit more difficult. I believe Frank can do the math on that. I'm nowhere near that clever. But that's one of those things where there's a certain kind of math where there's an average of how many seconds you can eat up per, like 100 meters per kilometer. So Carl and Ben putting in fantastic efforts for second and third place. Homer went from way at the back of the pack to fourth, fantastic effort. Erhan put in a stellar effort here, really holding the front of the pack for pretty much the first lap. Really fantastic to see. John here has really been leveling up really fast in game as well. So we're going to see lots of contention for top spots from John and Erhan, I'm sure. So as we watch John here cross the finish line, let's jump on over to our leaderboard. So what has that done for the scores? Well, I believe I made a mistake at the start here. This is actually our 3 times multiplier, I believe. Or do we only have a 2 times multiplier today? I can't remember. But we have Zeb, 60 points for the first place. Carl, 52 for second. Ben Chillian, 46 for third. Homer Thompson, 42 for fourth. Pedro, nicely rounding out the top 5 at 38 points. So let's see how things change going into race 2. Likely not much of a change considering this is just a 1 times multiplier, but this will see us take on one that has nice big round corners, but a couple of tight ones that might catch riders out. This is one of our sci-fi courses, Dark Matter Tech. 0 elevation, so riders will be able to take it easier, knowing that they're not going to have to really get up on the cranks and on the hoods and push through climbs in a race. So this will be somewhat reassuring, I'm sure. I love those holographic statues on the center and fringes of the course. And I love that, what's that called? Cold cathode lighting. That's fantastic stuff. Zeb off the front again. Zeb's determined that this is going to be his day. Solid power there. And again, looks like all of our riders are getting pretty used to knowing when to ease up. Oh, that's interesting. Zeb's normally really good at being able to ease off that power, but maybe a little bit of shock was put into him by seeing the shadow of Ben Chillian creep up beside him there. So Ben here on the lead. Holding solid speed. And expert use on freewheeling into the, the apexes of those tight corners. And Homer here really putting on the pressure on those cranks to get into second place. Carl putting in his contention to get into that second place position too. And holding tight to the corners so he can really press on those cranks coming through and out of the corners. And you can see exactly where Carl is beginning to ease off of the cranks, get a little bit close to freewheeling and come back on there from his webcam. And Erhan there taking advantage of that crash. So we're in the easy mode difficulty today, a crash time penalty of about 1.5 seconds. Which I don't need to spell it out to you, but that was a lot less of a time than it would take in the real world to get back on your bike. Collect yourself and get back up. Especially if you've gone top over. I know that my dad had a nasty crash a few years ago now, where he wiped out his collarbone and a couple of ribs. but that was at a fairly exceptional speed, I believe, on a downhill. That with some pretty bad rain didn't spot a pothole, a very large pothole. And yeah, that can unfortunately happen. And that's in England. I moved here by myself, so my family's still in the UK. And in rural England, those potholes are sometimes never filled, if ever. Pedro here putting in some good effort to chase and really close up that pack again. Oh. A bit of a nasty crash there. That was a steering collision, I believe, with Carl's front wheel colliding against the bike of Pedro's, which that is one of the mechanics in game here, realistic to the real world. And it can catch you out. Certainly it can catch out anyone if it can catch out an all-rounder like Carl. So that crash there from Zeb seems to have cost a little bit of time. So we're seeing him a little bit further in the pack, beginning to catch up a bit. The trouble is not to panic when you've fallen back a little bit, and again, it's way harder than... it's way easier to say than to do. Easier said than done. Jeez, I don't know how I forgot that saying. Because the more you panic, the more likely you are to have those crashes repeat. But again, it's infinitely easier said than done. So almost 7-second lead here by Ben against Frank. So we've got a rear cam here for race lead, and then the first person, which absolutely fantastic physics on these cameras as well, where you can even see that wobble of where you're pressing through the cranks to get back up to optimal cadence. Stuff like that is absolutely fantastic, and a great thing that riders can spot. So Ben there making it look easy. Am I the only person who turns completely red like a raspberry on my web camera? I suspect my fan is not powerful enough. It's kind of good enough, but passing grade. So only 300 meters left. It looks like it is Ben's race, but there's a 4-second, oh sorry, how should I phrase this? 2 seconds of that 6 seconds has been eaten up by Frank, so there's still a outside chance. Down to 3 seconds. Yeah, no, I think you're right, Ben. No, it's Ben's race. And there we go. So Frank and Homer likely coming in for second and third, getting North America onto the podium. And Carl coming in for fifth. Han putting in another solid race here. So being that this was just the single multiplier, the 1 times multiplier, what has this done to our score tally? Well, it's a good job I asked myself, because I can show you right now. That has changed things. So that has put Ben at the #1 spot with 76, just half a point ahead of Zeb in second place. Carl becoming third place position, 71 points. Homer still in fourth, I believe he was in fourth before, 65. And Frank rounding out the top 5, 56, just bringing 1 place above Pedro, who was previously 5th. So that means that we're on the race that is truly going to change everything now. That third race, country rally. So this is our 2x multiplier, another 0 meter elevation, which I'm sure everybody's going to welcome. But this is the mountain bike course. So with that resistance on direct drive smart trainers, you're going to feel that terrain difference is going to make the pedaling a little bit tougher. But let's see what that does as we hop on over to the map. Looks like we have a new rider from Switzerland. If anyone's going to be good at putting power through the cranks, it's somebody who lives in a landlocked mountainous country such as Switzerland. One of the big tours takes place in Switzerland. I can't remember the name of it, but that's all the way through the mountains there. It looks evil. And we're off out of the gates. Everyone on their mountain bikes today, except for Frank. He's going for the lowered rolling resistance of a road bike, meaning that he's going to have to pay extra attention on the off-road sections to braking coming into those corners, but I'm sure he's going to show us how it's done. It's going to lower that resistance through the cranks if Frank is on a direct drive smart trainer. Somewhat. I mean, you are still on like a shallow sand environment, but it will lower that. Pedro taking the lead here with Zeb in chase. We've seen Pedro come into his own on the mountain bike courses in the past. Let's see if he can make this happen again. Ben there wearing a t-shirt for his team, Hive. That's an awesome little nod to the team to see there. Hopefully not cotton though when you're putting down that kind of effort. Might get a bit cold and heavy. Oh, a bit of a steering collision there between Ben and Zeb. Zeb taking the lead. So seeing a number of crashes here, which is really stringing out that effort, which is not uncommon for us to see on the mountain bike courses. Especially the ones as technical as this one. But it is more interesting to see it in the corners rather than with the obstacles. Pedro there putting in some great power as he gets that resistance back down, back up to the optimal cadence, recovering from that crash. So Zeb determined to secure this as his day, getting a 3-second lead, which is a much smaller lead. Normally what we see on these mountain bike courses is that that lead is normally a bit smaller. Taking it extra cautious through these corners, learning from that previous race. Expert cycling there from Ben, taking it easy through the corners and really putting the pressure on the cranks on the straights coming out. Unfortunately, it does look like Erhan's had a bit of a technical issue there. I know that happened to me last week on one of the mountain bike courses as well. But a great effort on those first two races nonetheless. So holding really stable over threshold here for Pedro and seeking to close up that gap. Oh. So Ben is equally as determined to make this his day, to claim that pole position. Looking to close that gap with the rear wheel of Zeb. And both expertly handling the obstacles here. Very unfortunate crash there, which Carl has taken advantage of, and equally looking to close that gap. Oh. So this truly could be anybody's race right now. And that gap is coming down to, was that 7 seconds? There might be just enough time to close that gap with Zeb. So we're now entering the 4th and final lap. Neck and neck with Carl and Ben. So 600 meters to go. This is a tense watch, which is exactly the reason I'm leaving some gaps here in my commentary. I'm taking it in as much as I am relaying it at this point. So 9-second lead, so that gap has opened back up again with Zeb. And absolutely phenomenal power levels here. So lower cadence, higher tension gear, really ringing out that power, which has secured him that top spot. Fantastic effort from Ben. Oh, looks like Carl's had a technical. But recovered nicely to quite comfortably secure third place. Pedro's recovered very nicely too. Looks like comfortably coming in for the fourth place. So that ended up being a 14-second lead, 14 and a half seconds almost between between Zeb and Ben. And then it looks like another 23 between Ben and Carl. Pedro coming in almost a minute behind Zeb for fourth place. And I believe these are two bots that we're seeing cross the lines now. So let's see what that did to our score tally. So this was the race that could change everything, and I believe it may have done that. Well, certainly finalized it and made Zeb the top spot for today, 135.5 points. Just about 7.5 points ahead of Ben in second place, 128 points. Carl, third place, rounded out the podium for 117 points. Pedro jumping back to fourth place with 96. And then we've got a few, I believe these are bots we're seeing here that have filled up some of the spots. But wonderful effort from everybody today. Fantastic riding. Well, thank you for joining us today. That really was an edge of your seat set of races. And I hope you will join us on Tuesday when we will have another series of enthralling races right here on Cade Sport. And don't forget, you can join Cade Sport anytime by visiting cadesport.com. Thank you and have a wonderful day.